So, welcome back to the Anxiety Relief podcast. And today's episode is a deeply important one. And I want to start by kind of setting the tone properly before we go into this one. So, this is a trauma informed conversation we're going to be having today, but there's not going to be graphic details. But we will be talking about trauma, PTSD, and anxiety, these real live, life changing topics that if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably got similar stuff affecting you in some way. The episode is not about what happens so much, it's more about what happens inside your body afterwards and why so many people continue to feel unsafe for years later. And if you've ever thought, why am I like this? Or why am I still like this? I should say, should I feel better by now? Then this episode is for you. I've got an absolutely amazing guest for today's podcast, and I am joined by Heidi Johnson, a survivor of the Columbine school shooting back in 1999. And Heidi has lived with long-term side effects of trauma, PTSD, and various other bits, but I don't want to go too much into that because it's her story to share here with you today. And she's going to share her experiences with honesty, compassion, and hope. And I really hope that everyone listening to this really gets as much out of it as I think you will. So without further ado, welcome, Heidi.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I appreciate the chance to tell my story.
Thank you so much for coming on. We're obviously in complete different parts of the world at the moment, as we were just talking before the podcast started.
Yeah.
But that makes it even more exciting for me. And, I feel very privileged and lucky that this world we're living in at the moment, we're complete other sides of the world, yet we still manage to connect like this, especially with the video, because it really does
Yes.
make a difference. And we've already established the time difference and that. So I'm in the UK, it's 7 in the evening. You're in Colorado and it's midday. And we've also got totally different weather, haven't we? So like
You
I was saying,
do.
I was
Yeah.
saying
It's
how
nice and sunny here.
yeah, it's nice and sunny. You're dressed in all summery stuff. The light is shining on you, and I'm basically in a box. It's horrible outside, freezing cold. But that's the benefit of technology nowadays, isn't it? That we're actually able to
Yes.
get together like this. As we were discussing, Heidi, before the podcast kind of started in, you're not going to be going into like graphic details or anything, so people do not need to
Yeah.
avoid it. You've told lots of your story in that before, obviously over the years, but
Yes.
you're going to have loads to share that's going to help anyone suffering with anxiety, which is why I was so keen to get you onto the show. Really, let's start. If you tell us a little bit about yourself, just so people know kind of a bit more about the story. Or obviously, I've kind of given a hint as to what major event, but if you give them a little bit of an insight into yourself and kind of what's led to you being such an amazing guest.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I born and raised here in Colorado. Grew up loving the mountains. We have, I think, some of the most amazing mountains here. I know there's some wonderful ones in Europe as well, but feel very fortunate to have grown up in such a beautiful state. And so grew up here and currently working in global development and humanitarian work. I think that that is largely tied to just what I experienced early on during the Columbine shooting and having gone through such a acute survival situation, the empathy that it created in me to help others around the world is a direct correlation to the work that I do now in a lot of ways. And I feel very fortunate to be able to do work that gives me meaning in my day-to-day life that I feel very passionate about. I have a 12-year-old son who is my entire world and enjoy all the things that motherhood brings, even if it's constantly driving him all over the state to all the different sports events that he's in. So he is truly the love of my life, and I find so much meaning in being his mother as well.
That's a clip for him for like the 18th birthday or something there, isn't it? Right there. You can
Right?
have that in a card. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. That's brilliant. Let's go into a little bit about growing up and
Yeah.
whether you experienced any anxiety prior to the incident and then kind of how it's manifested past that.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in I would say, very high control, fundamentalist religious circle. I went to private school. and had a lot of anxiety as it related to what I was being taught in that forum. So things around just fear of death, fear of, in my circle, hell. That plagued me on a regular basis. And I remember just as a young child really struggling with deep existential questions, questions that as a child you probably shouldn't be thinking about, as it relates to things like your mortality in the afterlife. And that created, I would say, a lot of anxiety and then perfectionism in me too, as I was always trying to do the right thing, trying to be good enough, trying to be worthy and deserving of love and peace and things that every human should have just as their birthright. So I struggled with that. Of course, coming into, I ended up eventually leaving that private school setting and going to a public school, which I would say I was definitely a fish out of water in and struggled with social anxiety related to that. Just coming from a very, very small pond to a large group of people that didn't have the same base beliefs that I had, and how to relate to them was something that I struggled with on the day to day. And how to meet and cultivate friendships was something that was challenging in my early high school days. And so I remember just fearing what that looked like in my day to day and how to navigate that as a teenager, because I think, is common with all of us as humans, as we're searching for belonging and we're searching for friendships and people that we can authentically connect with. And when you feel like because of your upbringing or because maybe where you came from, you're a little bit different, it's hard to assimilate in those ways. And so I definitely struggled with that. And, went through some highs and lows in those first 2 years of high school, and then eventually went through a very acute traumatic event with the Columbine shooting, which I would say is an outlier as far as how that can produce not just anxiety, but so much trauma. And it did in me.
How old were you at the time then, Heidi, when it happened?
Yeah, I was 15 years old. And so I would say I was kind of a late bloomer. I was someone who took a little bit more time to develop. And I think a lot of that just came from being in this sheltered Christian school environment to coming into this. Columbine was a larger school, especially at that time in our area. There was about 2,000 students there. And so you could just easily get lost in the mix of things. And so, yeah, I was figuring things out on all angles when the shooting happened.
Wow. So, I mean, 15, it's still really young, isn't it? It's like and it's
Yeah.
it's a difficult time for most people, I think, that age. But
Mhm.
obviously, with what you've had beforehand and how big that school is and stuff, I can imagine that must have been really difficult, even prior to everything that happens after.
Yeah.
Talk us through then where we go from here then and how your life has suddenly changed.
Yeah. I mean, even though Columbine was a big school and there was a lot of newness and even I would say cruelty that I wasn't used to, that I experienced while I was there, and things that maybe at a point in time made me feel unsafe, just maybe more from a things that other students would say to me, violent language that I clearly struggled with. I didn't think that anything like the shooting would ever happen, though. It was overall a physically safe school in a lot of ways, despite its size and everything. So, the day that the shooting happened, I had found a cozy spot in the library that was overlooking the mountains. I mentioned how much I love growing up in Colorado and being able to see the mountains just somehow gives me peace and joy to be able to see these majestic, natural things. And so I looked out at the mountains and shortly into the period, heard loud bangs going off that really shook the floor. It was jarring, but it wasn't something that made me feel any sense of impending danger. I was thinking, it could be several different scenarios, and I was able to explain those to myself in a way that brushed it off. So I was thinking maybe this is construction that's happening. It's had a similar sound to that. Maybe they're working on something outside of the school. Or maybe the seniors, it was around that time of year when the seniors would be graduating. And so I maybe thought that they were playing a prank on the rest of the student body, which is not uncommon for them to do around that time. And so I continued working on my homework that I had been doing in the library. And shortly after the bangs started, I began to hear larger bangs, and the whole library began to fill with smoke. And so that's when it started to get even more unsettling. What was once like a question for me suddenly became okay, I'm starting to get a little on edge, anxious on what is happening right now. Why are there bangs that are creating smoke happening? Um, and then a teacher came running into the room, and I remember her being incredibly pale. And she was telling us several times, just frantic, that a kid had been shot. And so she was telling us, get under your table. We were sitting at tables that had maybe 5 or 6 chairs around them. She, not knowing exactly what to do or what instructions to provide, told us, get under your table, protect yourselves. And so I remember getting underneath my table. I pulled the chairs very close to me. At that moment, your body almost reacts much faster than your mind or emotions do. My heart was pounding. I was shaking and still just grappling with the surrealness of the moment, where it was almost like my mind and emotions couldn't keep pace with what was happening in the physical realm. It just didn't feel real, almost like I had suddenly found myself in a dream, a very bad dream, but it just didn't seem real. And as I had mentioned, that smoke was filling up the library because I had come to find out later that pipe bombs were going off. And so the fire alarms also started going off, the lights went off. And so it was like this dark, smoky environment. And I was able to see the entrance and exit to the library from where I was sitting. And I remember looking over to my right, and I saw these two shadow-like figures enter the library. I couldn't see their faces. I couldn't make out like any distinctive physical characteristics really, other than what looked like shadows. And I could see that they were holding guns. I could see that they were wearing trench coats. And I heard them clearly say, everybody get ready to die. And at that point, I just heard several shots throughout the library. And the resounding screams that would happen in response to the shots being fired. Because of where my table was, it ended up actually being the deadliest part of the library. And so I saw them point their gun underneath computer cubbies directly in front of me and point the trigger. And I heard them shooting kids all around me, basically. At one point in time, um, I could see their boots as they were walking by my table, and I could see the shotgun shells fall on the ground from rounds that they had just fired. And they looked under my table, and I kind of made eye contact with one of them briefly, and soon after that, they left the library. And I remember waiting for just a little bit before getting up, and then deciding I got up. I saw other students that were doing so as well. we found an emergency exit, and then we're able to get to somewhat safer of a situation.
Wow. It's difficult to really know what to say after that, Heidi.
Yeah.
Very, very traumatic. Do you know what I found really, really interesting at the start of that when you were saying about when it first starts, and you were saying one of the things you said that I really noted was about you were saying you could feel your heart going really quick and you could feel
Yeah.
your body kind of getting ready, but it was much quicker than your conscious mind was thinking, and that you had that kind
Mm-hmm.
of it didn't feel real because
Yeah.
that was probably one of the best examples I think anyone's ever described anxiety and what your body does. Because
Yeah.
essentially, like your amygdala, that was that kicking in, it's released all the adrenaline into your body to keep you
Yeah.
alive. So it's done this super, super quick. And it does that before your prefrontal cortex, the thinking side of the brain, comes in because it's
Yes.
basically like I've got to keep you alive. One of the examples I often say to people, like prior to this, the example I often give to people is, for example, if you went to step out on a road and you stepped and there was a car coming,
Yeah.
it's your amygdala that makes you quickly step back and go, "Oh, I've kept you
Yep.
alive." Because if it was our thinking side of the brain, we'd be like, "Oh, look, a car's coming. I wonder what speed that's doing. Should I step back or
Yeah.
not?" And then obviously we'd get hit. Um, but
Exactly.
you described that so well, and even when you were saying about how it didn't feel real because it's so sudden, you've
Mhm.
had this sudden injection of all these chemicals into your body with the adrenaline, cortisol,
Yeah.
etc. And actually, that depersonalization, it was almost like you weren't there. Like that, it was
Mhm.
so interesting how you described it because I was like, wow, this is the perfect
Yeah.
explanation of it all. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but at the same time, like absolutely terrifying. I didn't know you actually come that close with them and what had gone
Mhm.
on.
Yeah.
It's, so I was listening to that, and you kind of think, well, how do you ever get over that? And we'll go into that in just a moment.
Yeah.
But it's worth noting that no matter what anyone listening has been through, it goes to show that even when you're in a scenario as bad as that, like anyone listening, that is your absolute worst case scenario. I don't think, do you know what I mean? Like that is never something you would
Yes.
ever dream would ever happen to you
Yeah.
in a million years. And actually, that was another
Yes.
really interesting point of what you said actually at the start when and it kind of
Mm.
shows like anxiety wasn't a like a you definitely weren't like a in a negative cycle or like like
Yeah.
thinking of things
Right.
negatively prior to that because your first thoughts when you hear the bangs weren't that something's going wrong and that it's that oh it could just be this, it could just be that, so it's like
Yeah.
you weren't even you weren't making it worse for yourself, you were literally just
Yeah.
going oh it won't be that, these kind of things don't happen, it'd just be this. And it's not until you're being hit with all the evidence that your body's suddenly like okay, the switch goes, it's survival time. So that
Yes.
was really, really interesting as well, that part of it.
Yeah.
And I suppose the bit that people listening are definitely going to be wondering about
Mm.
is you've gone through something absolutely horrendous there.
Yeah.
Please, like share with us how you progressed
Yes.
from there. I mean, obviously, I'm guessing there's going to be points here afterwards where there's
Mm.
going to be the dips and dives, but
Yeah.
let's go into that and explain to us how it progressed.
It's been such a journey. I would say when it first happened in this area and context, and I think even related to my religious upbringing, mental health and trauma were not something that were, um, I would say, on people's radar. Uh, so initially, my healing journey took a very faith focused perspective of using things that I would consider today like magical thinking or scripture, almost to try and appease what was happening at a very to just say it like scientific like level for me. It wasn't it was this is what happens to somebody when their body brain experiences something so incredibly traumatic. um that wasn't on anyone's radar when I was recovering initially from this experience. There was a lot too, I think, related to my religious upbringing of needing to make my life special as a result of surviving. And so there was a level of pressure on, because I had come through this traumatic event when others who also went through the same event did not survive, that I somehow need to make my life worth surviving, which creates a ton of pressure. And so it wasn't even, there was the acute event that happened, which obviously for any person is going to create a great amount of trauma. But in addition to that, it was the traumas that were related to it too, of putting pressure on a survivor, that there somehow needs to be something that comes of their life as a result of going through this traumatic experience. And so for my healing journey, I spent I would say, next 10 years post Columbine really white knuckling healing. Um, and we had talked about the physical responses that your body has to trauma when even your own brain and consciousness can't keep up. That would happen on a frequent basis for me, and I would somehow just try and almost swallow it up. And so I would have these visceral responses to things that were even remotely similar to that event. I couldn't be a part of fireworks shows. I couldn't, if a car backfired, so anything, especially related to sound, was incredibly traumatizing for me. I remember also seeing someone, so they had worn army fatigues that day. I remember seeing someone who was wearing those and had a backpack strapped around his back at the airport, and instantly, without even knowing, you just go into a state of fight or flight. And so those things would happen, and I would have to coach myself, and people could see almost when I was having these responses, if they were bad enough, where it was almost like there were sometimes that I was able to just like quick talk myself out of it, be okay, get back to life, you know. There were some times though that I would just literally be frozen, and people would be looking at me, trying to communicate, trying to talk, and I was shut off to the world. And it was me trying to, like, just having these almost physical biological responses to my, like, what was stimulating me in the world, that was reminded me of that. And I think that I just remember, I remember in those moments being angry with myself, being, you know, like almost self-judging, like, why is it that you can't seem to get past this? Why is it that you keep having these responses? And looking back now, I'm like, that was my body trying to protect me. That was me, like, without like having to think things through, really working to make sure that I didn't go through that experience again. And I've learned to have an appreciation for my body and for the ways that it responds to those types of things, because that's what it's ultimately working to do, is protect me and keep me safe. And so a lot of my healing after that 10 years, I basically had, I would consider it a breakdown where I just was not able to function. I was able to hold it together, white knuckle it for 10 years, and I eventually reached, I would say, a point where I couldn't do it anymore. And I hadn't really not had any therapy. I had not been on any type of medication or anything like that. And I got to a point where I just was not able to function. And I have never been to the point of being suicidal or anything like that. But there was a piece of me that was like, I just cannot go on living like this anymore. I do not, I'm not enjoying my life. I knew that I wasn't living in the fullness of what life could bring, because I had not healed from this. And so I started pursuing therapy. I started talking through it, and not from the perspective of, because I had been telling my story ever, like a month after the shooting happened, I was telling my story. I was speaking lots of youth rallies and schools and on in the news. And so it wasn't a matter of my story not being heard. It was I needed to tell my story as it related to me and how I related to my story, not for the purpose of trying to help others, not for the purpose of me trying to, create meaning out of this event. It was me telling my story to someone for my healing, and that was the purpose of therapy for me. I got on medication. SSRIs were my dear friend for a while, and just helped give me some chemical tools to just not have to feel things so deeply. And that's, I think, what was the impetus for me having this breakdown is I would feel the trauma so deeply. If there was something that happened, maybe on the other side of the world where people had experienced something remotely close to me, I'm feeling that at a visceral level, and it's impacting me because of what I went through. And so I had to work through a lot of those things. And it's still, I mean, like in all candor, it's still a journey. And there are days that I have while things have gotten better, and I'm so incredibly grateful. I feel like I've learned to live more in the present than I did before. I was always either in living in the past of what had happened, or I was more so living, I would say, in the future of what could happen to me. And I remember having a period in my life where I was paralyzed by the fact that this could happen again to me. And how can I organize my life so that it doesn't? And trying to think through, what is it that I can do so that I would never have to experience gun violence like this again. And I, at the same time, was so full of anxiety, so full of fear that it was truncating like just my anxiety or my ability to live and embrace life as a whole. And so um, I I would say that, me being able to live in the present moment has been such a work in progress to get to. And I think I'm much better at it now. But I will say I sometimes do have those days, as I think anybody with violent trauma does. We just had a shooting not that long ago here in Colorado, and I had an awful week that week. I have an awful week because of what it does to remind me of what I went through. I have an awful week also just because I think about what the survivors are going to have to face on the heels of that experience. If they survived losing somebody, if they survived being at the event itself, if they survived an injury, whatever that looks like, um, that's all things that have a long recovery ahead, that I don't think you actually fully ever recover.
That was incredible, Heidi. Absolutely incredible. It was again, you hit some nails on the head, like really interestingly to do with
Mm.
anxiety. I'm going to go back quite a bit here. But
Yeah.
one of the things that was really interesting that you said, not necessarily, well, it is anxiety really, but it's probably something that people heard but may not
Mm.
have picked up on straight away. Was about when you were saying about that pressure from people that you're a survivor, and
Mm.
it's like you have to because
Mm.
that's happened, you have to make something of yourself.
Yes.
And I really listened to that and thought that is so true. Like you see this for lots of
Mm.
things, don't you? If someone's gone through that traumatic, it's like that's almost like, oh yeah, now you have to do really well, you have to do this. And actually
Yes.
it's why does it make any difference what you've actually been through?
Right.
But I could really relate to that. I was like, oh my God, that's such
Yeah.
a I've heard that from people before when they've had something really bad
Mm.
happens, and it's this pressure that is it's almost like a societal thing, isn't it? It's very,
Yes.
very strange. So that was really interesting because I don't think
Mm.
other people would necessarily mention that. And then when you were talking about, as you've gone through, when essentially you were going through what triggers there were, and when you were saying about it could be an item of clothing, or like the
Mm.
noise, fireworks and stuff. Like you were saying, it just instantly happened. It weren't like you were thinking it.
Mm.
And again, that's like it's because your amygdala had stored it as a memory. And when your neurons fire together, they wire together. So as soon as it's seeing
Yes.
that, it's relating that, oh, well, last time I saw that, that was danger, or previously that's been a
Yeah.
danger. And then the fight and flight kicking in.
Yeah.
So you describe that really well because that is
Mm.
essentially what happens to people, isn't it? Like once they've had a bad experience with something, and it obviously doesn't need to be, and for most people wouldn't be anywhere near the level you are, but it only
Yeah.
takes that one occasion that it's something bad or something they don't want. If your mind has decided it wants to keep you safe because that's what it's trying to do, it releases the adrenaline, your heart goes quicker, you start getting all them weird and wonderful symptoms that, millions of different symptoms people have,
Yeah.
but it's instant, isn't it? So although there is some
Mm.
anxiety that's cortex based where people can think their way into it. And I always describe
Mm.
it as being like the fuel, which obviously
Yeah.
it's more like that's the afterthoughts of actually, well, what if this is happening? But it's them memories with you, isn't it? Because it's
Yeah.
initially that happens, it's so quick. And then how do you change that, So it takes a lot of time of, over the years to try and rewire it that actually you can see that now and it doesn't necessarily mean what it did once mean to you. That was really, really good. And the other thing I really liked, because this
Mm.
has been a big thing for me in my journey, is about being present in the moment. Because I think it's very easy for people to almost always live in the future,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
we're always thinking ahead as to what, you could be quite, even if you were quite good at setting goals and what you want to achieve, but you can spend so much time just thinking about what you want to do with life and, about bills you've got
Yeah.
coming in the future, that it's very easy not to live in the current time, isn't it? It's exceptionally
Yes.
easy. Did you use any like grounding techniques or anything when you were trying to bring yourself to the present moment, or do you still use that?
I think what has been one of the most wonderful things for me to discover is just, and this is such a basic thing, but I am very consistent in the gym. I get mad, I think, when I have to have a rest day, but I would say walks, weightlifting, cardio, anything that is physical just helps me get into the present moment like nothing else does. Um, but I think too, I mean, beyond that, learning to just love day-to-day experiences. And I know there's techniques and things, and I've worked through several with my therapist, but just building as much as you can a meaningful, wonderful life. And it's with whatever you have, but I look at moments that I get to share with my son and how I get to be a part of him growing up. That helps me stay in the present moment because I am watching and actively participating in his growth and development and what that looks like. And I don't know if anyone has a teenager, but when you have someone that's he's close to that phase of what that requires for you to be very active and engaged with them in the day to day. So that gives me a lot of just sense of presence in the moment. I think, and one thing that I've really tapped into too, I know I mentioned exercise as being so key for me, but I also love cooking. And so being able to just enjoy a really good meal that you have put together. That brings you into the present moment, I feel like, because you're enjoying it in the present. And we know when we eat a meal that we're going to enjoy it for, you know, an hour at most, and then it will be over. But it's something that we get to partake in as humans, where we get to enjoy it and take it in and hopefully share it with people that we love. And I think that it's those types of things that just help us create this relationship with the present instead of, oh, when I'm eating a really good meal, what I'm not doing is thinking about, oh, I can't wait till my next great meal. I'm enjoying the meal that I'm eating now. And so I think that it's just things like that that help us um, really live in the now. And I think that that's helped me just have a much more happy, joyful, peaceful life is those types of things. Being in nature, and I mean, Colorado again, wonderful for that. Being outside is something that is my mental health too. When I can go out and feel the sun on my face, go for a walk, um, experience things that are happening in nature, whether it's like seeing, a bunny rabbit that's like trying to run away or whatever the case may be, just noting those little things in that moment are also so helpful too.
That was really good. And I don't know if the listeners picked up on this, but the food and stuff like that, right? It's using your senses. And when you use your senses,
Mhm.
you bring
Yeah,
yourself back to the present moment. And
yeah,
people always think it has to be like, the five things you see, four things you hear type scenario, but it doesn't.
right,
Like that was a
right.
really good real life example of how you can actually feel
Yeah.
present in the moment. And actually, one of the other ones that really gets looked over is exercise. Because people very much
Mhm.
look at it as in terms of like, oh, I'm doing it to lose weight or whatever like that. But actually, when you're there
Yeah.
and you're feeling the strains and that does ground you. And exercise is one of the best ways for actually combating anxiety, especially when it's coming from your amygdala, from previous
Mhm.
experiences, etc. That with muscle relaxation and breath work, which obviously naturally, when you're doing exercise, you're more conscious of
Yes.
your breaths. Hence why it's
Yep.
so powerful, especially when you're combining. That's a really amazing example for people as to how actually it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to go out and learn all these. Don't get me wrong, there's loads of
Yeah.
techniques and there's lots of things that work.
Yes.
But if you can't
Yeah.
afford to do them things, or you don't want to, and you just want to try something that you could
Mhm.
start today, they are things you can start. Yeah, you don't have to go to
Yeah.
you don't even have to go to a gym. You can do weights at home, press ups, whatever, and you will
Yep.
get some relief from them. So Heidi's giving you literally like a perfect example there, that hopefully people will take that away from that. Because I was thinking when you were saying about food, I was thinking I'll have to mention this because some people will not get it, but that is you're using your
Yeah.
senses. And obviously, you're learning at the same time. You're cooking new things. It's the
Yes.
enjoyment of involving other people and getting to share it with them. There's lots of elements in
Yeah.
there that will make your life better. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. That was really, really good as well. Heidi, what would you say to someone if someone's listening to this and they're kind of, they're thinking they feel like they're broken? Because people often think they're broken or there's something wrong with them when they're going through anxiety. People often think they'll never get rid of it and it won't go away. What would be like a one real big takeaway you would give people to say, like, if they could only take one thing away from today, what would it be?
I mean, as someone who has felt broken, especially go after what happened to me, I relate to that so deeply. And I think for me, there would be times, and I had mentioned I think earlier on in our conversation about just being angry at myself for not being able to get past certain things or having these types of biological responses to what was happening in my outside world, or like just not feeling okay in the moment, or whatever the case may be. I think I've just learned to have so much more self compassion. And I mean, this was another great technique, is trying to talk to yourself like you would a good friend. So much harder on myself than I would ever be on any of my dear girlfriends that I care deeply about. That if they were to come to me and express to me what they were going through, I would come to them with kindness and compassion and grace. And I don't give that same courtesy to myself. And so I think really having a lot of compassion as it relates to anxiety. And maybe it's just a reiterating, but I've learned to just appreciate and thank my body for the ways that it works, even behind the scenes in my subconscious, to keep me safe. That is when I'm having an anxious response, it's my body working to keep me safe. And so taking that in more as information, trying to figure out, okay, what's going on, and getting curious rather than approaching it with judgment, rather than coming at it from a place of I need to bury or push this down. But let me get curious as to why am I feeling this right now on the inside? That's been, I think, revolutionary for me too. But again, I think just a lot of self-compassion. Anxiety is something that I think is so common to the human experience. I think it's something that our environment and world breeds in us just from what we have to take in as humans, that I don't think we were actually meant to take in a lot of the things that happen in our world that we are
Mm.
forced to take in right now. And so I think that, it's a matter of us like learning to live with it, but then also just practicing that self-compassion and grace.
You're making some really mega points here. The compassion judgment side of it is massive. I see that
Yeah.
day in, day out with people, and
Mm.
you explained it really well when you were saying about the way you speak to yourself, the things people say to themselves. And I've been
Yeah.
there for this. Like I used to be a
Yes.
nightmare for doing this. You would never say to anyone else ever,
Mhm.
yet
Yes.
it's acceptable to say to yourself. And the voice
Yeah.
our mind listens to the most is our own one. So when we're being really hard on ourselves, like we're literally like
Mhm.
kicking ourselves in,
Mm.
yet we'd never say it to anyone else. And there seems to be this common theme where when people are suffering with anxiety because of how quickly it can restrict you and change your life, that
Yeah.
they blame themselves for it, and they blaming their body is often a thing, and they're thinking, oh, why is my body broken? Why is it not working? Why is it
Yeah.
this? And actually, as you said, no, it's just the fact your body's trying to protect you. It might be
Mm.
misfiring, or you've been through the trauma, like in your case, and it
Yeah.
needs time to heal from it.
Yes.
So that was really like really important that you said that. So and I love it that a guest can come on here, and so it's not just coming from me, because these are things that I know I've told people, hundreds and
Yes.
hundreds of times, and this is
Yeah.
complete proof from someone who's completely lived
Yes.
through horrendous events, through
Mm.
really difficult anxiety, that actually there is light at the end of the tunnel, isn't there? And there are things you can do that are going to dramatically improve your life. And
Yeah.
it's your
Yes.
mind, isn't it? I always find it amazing how with life, like, people often don't want to invest in things to do with their mind. If it's like an online
Mm.
course or something, they think a lot more about it than if they just go and
Yeah.
spend some money on a night out or something. Yet you're like, you get a lot more from that. But
Yeah.
it's obviously something to do with
Yes.
marketing and society and the way, and you hit the nail on the head with about how the world is now.
Yeah.
We're in a total different world to what any previous humans have
Mm.
ever experienced, with how quick technology's changing, and
Yeah.
how many different things we have pulling us in all kinds of directions now. So actually, like, if you go back to what we would have been years ago, well, actually, it is a bit of a scary world in a way, and our bodies are still
Yes.
trying to adapt to it, aren't they? I suppose.
Yes.
It's been amazing, Heidi. Like I know I obviously called it at the start that I said I thought this was going to be a really, really good, interesting chat, but it's even better than I thought it'd be. I just want to get that out there, like even better.
Thank you.
And I expect I will have listeners write in and stuff about this episode and that, and I can always come back to you. And if people really want it, we can always do another
Absolutely.
one at a later date, because I've really
Absolutely.
enjoyed it.
Yes.
Yeah, you've been brilliant. Is there anything else you want to share at all, Heidi, before we start to wrap this one up?
No, this has been such a wonderful conversation. And I mean, as much as I have said that, like I don't try to operate out of my survivor's guilt anymore. But there is a level of just being able to come and share, what I have learned over the course of a very long healing journey, to be able to, hopefully help in some way or capacity someone who's experiencing anxiety. It does, and I'm hesitant to say it, but it does help bring meaning to that horrific event that I went through, and just being able to share that. So I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the ability to tell my story. I do it just because I know I have lived through some things and have learned some things along the way, and would love to just help others because I know how common it is to feel this way, regardless of, and I know my story is an outlier in a lot of ways, but I know that we all have gone through traumatic experiences and the impact that those can have on our lives and the ways that it can get you stuck and where you're just And I think what's just the tragedy of that is you know that you're stuck. And I think anxious people tend to be some of the most intelligent people in the world because we know we're like, I would love to get past this. I just don't know how. And so, however, I can tell my story that would just maybe help unstick someone, just helps me find meaning in what I went through. So I appreciate you giving me the forum to do that.
Thank you so much for coming on, Heidi. I'm absolutely certain there will be people who listen to this that are gonna just, sometimes you hear something and that can be enough of a breakthrough to give you that push you
Yeah.
need to get through whatever it is you're going through. I have zero doubts that
Mm.
that will happen from this. You've given so
Yeah.
many really good takeaways for
Thank
people.
you.
And I'd also ask the listeners, anyone who does listen to this, if you know anyone else who will benefit from Heidi's story,
Mhm.
please share it far and wide. But thank you so much,
Yeah.
Heidi, for coming on. You've been absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Anxiety Relief Podcast. I hope today's episode left you feeling a little more calm, confident, and in control. Remember, small steps every day can lead to a big transformation in your life. If you found this episode helpful, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who you think might benefit. For more tools and resources, head over to my website at www.rossrolf.com. And don't forget to join the Anxiety Relief Hub on Facebook, which is a supportive community where you can connect, share, and grow. Until next time.